Okay, let's talk about something else now. And these two things kind of go together. So this one is something that a lot of you will have probably seen before, particularly those of you that might have worked in the corporate world. And it's quite an old model. So it's the Kubler-Ross change curve. So, you know, we do see varying versions of this. But let's give you a version that's hopefully straightforward enough for everybody to understand. So what we've got is we've got time over here on the horizontal axis, and over here we've got perhaps motivation. We could perhaps call that performance or mindset as well, but let's just call it motivation for today. Now, when we experience change, we always experience the same things to differing degrees. So if this is the point, if this is day 0, when we first experience the change, often we initially go into a state of shock. So we see an uplift in motivation. A good little example of this is football teams. When they change manager, quite often they win a couple of games. Everybody says, oh, the new manager's amazing. Well, it's often not that's actually happening. I know manager can't make that much difference that quickly normally. What's happened is the shock has seen an uplift in motivation. It's kind of that fight or flight reaction, I guess. Then what happens is we drop down and our motivation slips to a low point that hopefully we then come back out of, and we see ourselves actually ultimately achieve a higher level of motivation than we originally started with. So what's happening during this process? Okay, so we talked about the initial bit, which is shock. So we initially get shock, which sort of creates that uplift in motivation. But after a little bit of time, we quite often slip into a state of denial. So what happens is that we start to deny subconsciously the situation, and then we'll start to see a downturn in our motivation level. Then we'll often see frustration creep in. This is the point at which we might start to make silly decisions because we're frustrated. Our emotional state is heightened. We might start to blame other people for the situation that we're in. And that's obviously a really frustrating time, a really difficult time for you to deal with. And a lot of us are probably somewhere in this place at the moment with the lockdown situation, I guess. I'd like to think I'm a little bit further along this process on lots of parts of it because I had that fortune to experience some lockdown under Spanish authority before we came back to the UK. So, shock and our frustration. Probably you're somewhere in this phase at the moment. Then we end up with depression. I'm not too sure how I feel about the term depression, because I know depression is really a clinical state, but I guess it's the best way to describe, which is the bottom, the lowest point of motivation that you have. So you'll expect to slip down into a point. At some point, you've got to be at your lowest level of motivation. Hopefully, you won't continue just dropping down indefinitely. Okay, then what happens is we might start to find, answers, solutions. We might discover a new normal to some extent, and at that point we start to experiment. So for example, we have been experimenting with the way that we run our virtual indoor sessions for our athletes so that they can still train, and we get them back to a new normal pretty quickly. So experimentation is next, and decision making. So we start to make decisions about what it is that we're actually going to do. So we experiment, and then we try to make decisions. And then we take actions. So once we've made the decisions about what it is we're going to do, we start to act. We actually start to do stuff. And then hopefully, once we've started to act, we see some integration. So that's when we've established our new normal, and our new normal has become not new normal anymore, but just normal. At this point, we start to hopefully see a higher level of motivation than we saw before the change. Okay, so what is it that you guys are all going to be experiencing this at the moment. So what is it you need to try to do, ideally? Let me just get a different colour pen. So what we want to try to do, and forgive me for using this phrase because this is something we see a lot at the moment, but we want to try to flatten the curve or shorten the curve, or ideally both. So what I mean by that is if we want to flatten the curve, what we want to try to do is reduce the extremes at which we're feeling the change, the emotional range, I guess, feelings during the time period. So the time period may be the same, but we're reducing the extremes of our feelings and our emotions during that time. So what we've got is we've got a level of, well, let's get a better pen, sorry. Our motivation may not creep up quite so much, but hopefully it also won't dip as much either. And what we see is we see a flatter change curve. So we still see the same change, I guess, over the time. But what we do is we experience a more stable state of mind during that period. We may not see such a high uplift in motivation, but that's what happens if we try to flatten the curve. Now, the other option that we've got is that we shorten it. So what we do is we squash it. So what we do is reduce the time it takes us to reach integration. So we might potentially feel the same, forgive me if my graph drawing is not very good here, we may feel the same levels of our sort of mindset or state but or motivation, but what we do is we're fundamentally shortening the time over which we experience that. So we move through the change curve more quickly. So over here, obviously, same amount of time, but just a different level of extremes. Now, in an ideal world, if we can, what happens is we actually do both. So what we do is we experience less extremes and we shorten things. So what we do is we see something along the lines of the green dotted line there. Let me draw that in solid line, maybe that will help. Okay, so what we do is we see the same extremes, we see less extremes, so we're not seeing the same top and bottom as we would on a normal change curve. We're seeing a lower level of extremes, hopefully a nice high level of integration at the end and heightened motivation, but during the change curve experience, what we're doing is we're shortening the time, reducing the extremes. So that's what we're aiming for, guys. What we're going to do over the coming days is hopefully help you with techniques that can contribute to you shortening and flattening that curve. Now, I find personally, and a lot of our guys find within our community, that just being aware of this itself is hugely helpful, because obviously one of the things that's difficult for us to control is emotion. Emotion is hard for us to control. And if any of you want a recommendation of a video, and I'll show you a version of this later in the week, Alan Watkins has a fantastic model called the Interstate Model. I might even share the link to this on this post, which explains how emotions affect the way that you think and the way that you feel, and ultimately affect your behaviours and your choices. But guys, sometimes we can't do anything about how we're feeling inside. But this, for me, helps me understand why I'm feeling like I'm feeling, and it helps me be more mindful of that and able to make better conscious choices about changing the way that I'm feeling. So if I recognise that I'm in frustration and I know that depression is coming, two things. One, when it comes, I'm not so concerned about it, but I also have a better chance of avoiding it or reducing the extreme to which I'm going to feel that if I'm aware where I am on the change curve. It's really, really important. So maybe make a note of this. And for me, I've actually been plotting where I am. I know a lot of our guys have been doing the same. They've actually been looking at this and going, right, where am I today? And the other thing you've got to remember at the moment is that you're going to be feeling multiple, so volatility, again, back to the VUCA model, multiple changes. So what's going to happen is you're at different points in the change curve for different things. So you won't be that you're just going to be at one point at any given time. Every time you experience a new change, you're going to be going through the change curve, and those change curves will be longer or shorter than each other, and they may create greater extremes of emotion than each other. But you'll be experiencing multiple change curves, and that's normal in life anyway, but at the moment just more change curves than you would be used to. So there we go, guys. So there's a little bit there about a provisional state up the top. We've done a little bit about choices and choosing your attitude. We've done a bit about VUCA, and we've done change curve. So hopefully, guys, there's plenty there that will help you over the coming days. And I said we'll share more and more models as the days go on that should be able to help you. Okay, thanks, guys. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.